Hello, everyone. It's 10:31, so I'm starting late, but we're going to start the later session at exactly 11:45, so I'm trying to set the expectation. We're moving along on time. I'm Andrea Morgan from the Office of Economic Development. I work in the housing division as a housing development officer. Maybe I should start saying home development officer after that, home and community development officer, after that nice talk that we had this morning. I'd like to welcome you here on behalf of the mayor and everyone else who works in the city. We're really glad to see so many energetic and creative people here today to help us work towards solving our problems of affordable homeownership. So I just have a couple of housekeeping things to run through. At the end of this session, at 11:30, we'll have another coffee and snack break because we know we're giving you lunch a little bit late at 1 o'clock. So we don't want you to get hangry before the next session after this. If there are any Spanish speakers in the audience, the breakout's being translated from English into Spanish, and Spanish speakers are invited to ask questions, and the questions will be translated into English for the audience. When we get to the point of audience questions, there's a microphone more or less in the middle of not quite in the middle of the room, but please use the microphone. Because this session is being recorded, it'll be available on the city's website or the city's YouTube channel, but everyone who's registered, we'll let you know how to get access to that. I've heard from many people that they wanted to be in more than one breakout session, so you'll have the opportunity to view the ones that you couldn't get to see today. And then I just want to have a big thank you to our speakers and our moderators, who you'll meet in a minute. And to our planning committee members, Katie McKenna from Habitat is here. She was on our, where are you, Katie? Stand up and say, thank you to Katie for helping to plan this session. And to quite a few of the people who are on our steering committee who helped plan the conference overall. I think Jesse Adkins might be in the room. If you are, stand up, Jesse. Susan Powers was on our steering committee. And Maria Sepulveda from Wells Fargo was also on our steering committee. So with that, can I borrow this for a second? With that, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Barbara Jackson. She's spent 20 years in the construction industry, including as the owner of Design Build Services, Inc., and another 15 years as a pioneering educator. 3 years ago, she was appointed as director of the Franklin L. Burns School of Real Estate and Construction Management at the University of Denver, where she has developed an educational model representing the full life cycle of the built environment, and where she's inspiring a new generation of integrated project leaders. Thank you, Barb, for being here today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm pretty excited to be here myself, and after sharing a few moments with each one of these panelists, I'm even more excited. These leaders that we have with us today, I think, are going to be very, very informative and hopefully in some instances actually inspirational. So without further ado, I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves one at a time, and how it's going to work is after their introductions, then I will come back up and very briefly give just a couple comments about how that they will, the areas that they are going to speak upon, and let them come to the mic, and they'll have some slides and other information to share with you one at a time. At the end of that, we may have some additional questions, but we will also open the floor for questions to the panelists. And so we'll just start going down the line here. We'll start with Susan, actually, if she'd like to introduce herself, please.
Sure. Susan Powers, and I am the president of Urban Ventures, which is a real estate development company in Denver.
Dominica Acevedo, I'm Deputy Director of Northeast Denver Housing Center. Can you hear me now? Deputy Director of Northeast Denver Housing Center. Been doing housing development for over 20 years there.
Ann Padilla-Padas. I am on the Board of Directors for Habitat for Humanity Metro Denver, and I work for the Denver District Attorney's Office Juvenile Diversion.
Good morning. My name is Heather Lafferty, and I'm the CEO of Habitat for Humanity of Metro Denver.
Very good. So now we're going to go in the reverse order, and we're actually going to start with Heather, and Heather is going to talk to us about the why of home ownership and the difference that that makes in people's lives. Heather.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're thrilled to be here this morning and to have an opportunity to talk about both the why we need affordable homeownership in our community, and some of my colleagues here will talk about how we get to that point. But I'd like to start with just a little bit of context around what homeownership looks like in our country. Now, for those of us who own a home, we have some great news, and that is to share that home values have largely reached the peaks of what they look like kind of before the bust in about 2008. So this is a really good sign, obviously, for the overall economy and for people who do own their homes and need the value in that home. What I think is important to just kind of, as part of a context point, put into this is that this shows what value homeownership provides in terms of an economic piece. And so when we're talking about why homeownership, and we're looking specifically at providing affordable homeownership to lower income households, and people will say, well, why do we need to do that? Why can't they just rent? We need to come back to understanding the overall value. Now, the challenge is that when these values have come back to the peak levels, it means that affordability for low-income families has been more of a challenge. Can anybody guess what the homeownership rate is in the country today? Just shout it out. You don't need a microphone. 60%? Good. You're right. It's at about 63%. Unfortunately, that is the lowest the homeownership rate has been in the last 20 years. Here in Denver, that rate is even lower, at about 50%. Now, when we talk about this and why this trend in homeownership has come down, there's a lot of kind of myths out there. The reality is that it's because fewer low-income households are transitioning into homeownership rather than people who are being pushed out of homeownership. And that's important because what that means is when we go back to that first slide and think about what wealth looks like in this country, it's largely within housing, within homeownership. And so when less low-income households are able to get into homeownership, they're not accessing the wealth that many of us are able to. The challenge right now, and this was just referred to a few moments ago by Chris in the large session, is that what the factors are that are really keeping people from entering into affordable or into homeownership is access to affordable houses, so the actual products that are in the market. And that's certainly a case here in Denver. The requirements for lending have also required higher down payments. And so if you're a family who is paying rent every month with not a whole lot to save, being able to save up for 20% to be able to put down on an increasingly unaffordable product is a real challenge. And then the requirements for lending and access to credit has been obviously even greater challenge as it was in some of the times when we had a higher homeownership rate. Unfortunately, what we're seeing also is that decline in homeownership overall has hurt younger households as well as black households and lower income households even more. So you can see by this chart, and we don't need to get deep into the numbers, but just so that you can understand what this looks like, especially for neighborhoods and communities of color. 16% decline in homeownership in the black community and black households during this 20-year period. Also, what's not shown on here, but is equally challenging, is that there's been 11% drop in low-income households that are owning their home. And so again, when we think about what value is held in homeownership, we're losing that in low-income households as well as black households. And so this is a real challenge to see these steeper declines in those communities more so than the national numbers. So just to share a quick kind of quote that comes out of the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies that really says that, there's a lot of discussion around, well, should we be subsidizing? Should we be putting resources into providing low-income families with home ownership? Is that deserved? Is that something we want to value as a nation, as a country, and as a community? And so what Harvard looked at is this the smart move? Is this the right strategy? And I think this quote sums it up, that even after the challenges in 2007 and 2008, home ownership is still a good deal. It's still where especially lower income households are able to find an ability to save and to gain an asset. When we're looking at some very kind of coming down to the micro level and thinking about what does this mean when somebody goes from spending more than 50% of their monthly income on housing down to 30%, which is, I know specifically in our program at Habitat, what we target our housing cost towards, and I know that's what HUD deems as affordable. That means real money for low-income families. If that we just kind of put up here some examples, that difference, about $1,000 a month, if you're at about a $70,000, which is below the area median income, that is the ability for a family to have additional money for healthy food, to help pay for childcare expenses. And because we know that many families that we're working with are working 50, 60 hours in 1 to 2 jobs, trying to get overtime to kind of meet those housing needs in terms of their expenses, this is the ability for them to back off if that's what they desire, so they have more time with their family. And I think these are the things when Chris was talking about stopping talking about housing and really talking about home and community. I think that what he's talking about really is the human aspect of our work. And I think this is a very real example of why we need to make sure housing is affordable. Now at Habitat, we have watched this happen. We have been doing this work in the Metro Denver area for about 38 years, and we have been able to witness the generational transformation of families who have moved into Habitat homes, and what that means not just for the homeowners and the family immediately, but for what that means over time. And so I'm going to share with you a couple of statistics, and we just have a few more minutes, about why homeownership is so important and what that really means. The first thing I'll share is that, well, it's jumping ahead of me here. 98% of children growing up in a Habitat home are graduating from high school. Now, this is significant. We're in the housing industry, not the education industry, and yet this is a direct outcome. The graduation rate in the state of Colorado last year was 79%. So this is about 20% better. And that 79% across the state is of all income levels. This is a low income, for us, largely below 50% AMI during that time. And so what's happening is that, we're building a house today that's creating that affordability for families, and they're able to have healthy meals. They're able to have stability where their kids can sleep at night. And the ultimate outcome for many is their children doing well in school. The next piece that I want to share with you is talking a little bit about the economics. Overall, we know that homeowners have about 13 times the savings in assets that a renter has. And that's important for families as they're looking forward. It also gives them a lot of financial security. Knowing what they make, their income is, and what their housing costs are. If their income goes up, their housing costs don't go up. And so they are able to put more into savings and to build that asset. I won't ask all of you in here how many of you have a budget and stick to that budget, but the reality is that that's what our families are prepared to do. They've worked hard to get into their home. They know what it means to the success of their families, and they are sticking to that budget. Even if their incomes haven't gone up significantly, they're still able to make it work because of that affordable housing cost. And then the last number that I'll show just briefly is we estimate that last year Habitat homeowners just here in the Metro Denver used about $1.5 million less in public assistance than previously. And this is important when we think about not just the impact on our families, but what that means for us as a community, and how then we're able to take those dollars and to recycle, to get those back for families who continue to need those supports. And so I think this is an important thing for us to think about, is when we're able to create a permanent solution to a family's housing situation, their housing crisis, what this means both from a social and an economic benefit standpoint. And so I'll just kind of sum it up by saying that, what we have found at Habitat, and I think what both the research and the data that we've been able to work through in our program shows, is that because families have a good, stable home, they are able to succeed in many other ways. They're thriving, they're reaching their full potential. And when the conversation gets around, well, why do we have to subsidize low-income families so that they can own a home, and that they gain that asset when, that might not be as fair? I would just ask, how many of us own a home and take a mortgage interest deduction every year on our taxes? We are subsidizing homeownership across the spectrum. And for us to be able to ensure that low-income families and their neighborhoods benefit from the stability of owning an affordable home, this is something we need to commit to as a community and as a society. To help share a little bit more than just the numbers, I am now thrilled to introduce you to our next panelist, Ann Padilla-Parras, who is a Habitat board member, as she introduced herself, and works with the Denver District Attorney's Office, working with as a diversion officer. She also grew up in a Habitat home, and I think is able to share and reflect upon her experience, and to be able to share her success as a direct outcome of the work that her mom did to get them a stable home, and what that means for her and her children here today. So please help me thank Ann for being with us this morning.
So the numbers Heather shares ring so true for my family. Of course, I didn't know at the time the profound impact having a stable home was having on me. But in hindsight, I can see it clearly. My mom bought our home when I was 10, but before, our family struggled. My mom, my 5 siblings, and I moved several times, and we attended several different schools. My mom worked hard. She worked hard to be a good parent, to make ends meet, to keep a roof over our heads. But it wasn't easy. Our house was our foundation. Not just the physical foundation, but it was the thing that provided us the emotional strength, and it gave our mom so much strength. My kids will never have the same struggles or worries that I had, and it's simply amazing. I am not at all surprised when I hear that 98% of Habitat children graduate from high school. I knew that I had something I didn't have before, and I had to make the most of it. And just so you know the numbers in our family, my father dropped out of school in the 8th grade and didn't know how to read. My mom dropped out in, I think, the 10th grade, and she didn't get her GED until we moved into our Habitat home, because before that, she was really just trying to survive, not live. So all of my siblings and I graduated from high school. I graduated from college, the first in my family and my extended family. All of my nieces and nephews and my kids that have gone to high school have graduated. One of my nephews is at CU Denver. One is going to Mesa this year. My son, he is at CU and he's going into his sophomore year. So I'm not the end of the story. So like I said, he completed his first year at University of Colorado. And throughout his life, he's known that he would graduate high school and attend college. It was never, will you? We talked about it at a really young age. He actually wanted to be a reporter before, but that changed. The only questions were really of just where he would go, and not even if he would do well. Like, it's an expectation. So one of the classes he took in his freshman year was speech. So I'm not wasting my money, and he's going to come up and talk for a second.
I can certainly say that my grandmother's decision to buy a Habitat home back in 1982 was not only beneficial for her children, but her grandchildren as well, such as myself. That one house completely changed the trajectory of all the generations in our family as we moved further and further away from the instability that my grandmother faced as she was raising her kids. Like my mom said before, Habitat provided the foundation for her siblings and her to grow. And that same foundation has extended to us as we continue to flourish and dream bigger. Thank you.
This is a picture of our family. There's more that we've had since then, but.
Thank you both, Heather, and I didn't catch your son's name. Arthur? Very good. Thank you, Arthur. From the perspective of an educator, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing the young folks and the next generation of leadership stand up and tell us and share with us the what's so in terms of what makes a difference for them and their future. So thank you, Arthur, again. Now we're going to move on to Dominique, and Dominique is going to speak to us about how design innovations and construction efficiencies can actually help reduce the cost and close the gap that prevent us from achieving our affordability goals. Dominique?
Okay, I'm Dominique Acevedo, Deputy Director of Northeast Denver Housing Center. I'm very excited to be talking to you all today about our Stapleton Townhomes Affordable Homeownership Project. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Northeast Denver Housing Center, we're a nonprofit affordable housing builder. We've been doing that since 1982. We have a reputation for building quality, healthy housing for low to moderate income families. And over the past 6 years, we have built and rehabbed over 250 units within Denver. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Stapleton Townhomes. Just to give you an idea, it takes a large project team to do these projects. Northeast Denver Housing Center is the developer. We have Forest City Stapleton as the master developer funding development partner. DAO Architecture is the architect, M&B Construction as the contractor. So first, a brief overview. Stapleton Townhomes are 2 and 3 bedroom townhomes, 950 to 1353 square feet. They range in price from $166,000 to $235,500 in sales price. To date, over the past 3 years, we've completed and sold 83 townhomes. And currently, we have 40 under construction and under contract, as well as 63 in design and entitlements right now, of which we have a 150-person wait list for that phase. So the demand is incredible. We just, by the way, opened up pre-sales for that 5 days ago for the 63 units. And we already have 50 of the 63 pre-sold in 5 days. And just to mention, our listing agent shared with me that as a lot of the reservations were being made, we had families crying on the way out as they did that. This is huge. We're primarily serving families that desire good schools and neighborhood amenities, 1 to 4 member households, and their income ranges from $31,000 to $72,000 annually. So primarily, for those of you who are familiar, 60 to 80% of Denver's area median income is what that income range is. And I just want to mention that the fact that they're in Stapleton is huge. Where you produce affordable housing is absolutely critically important, and these families need good neighborhoods that are supportive with good schools. So I want to talk about the challenge, the funding gap. So for instance, on our Stapleton Townhomes project, 40 units, phase 6, 40 units, roughly a $9.5 million project, and we were able to raise 68% of the total development cost to build it with loans. That's purely based off of the fact that we're generating only so much revenue from that $166,000 to the $235,500 price. So that means there's a gap of 32%. And we have to fill that with help from our funders, our city and state public funders and others, master developer funding partners, in order to fill that. What you all should know is 32% gap for an affordable homeownership project. Jane, I know you know this, that's low. That's incredibly low. They're typically 67%, 70, even higher. So I want to talk to you all today about how you use design and how you build them to reduce that gap, which is what we've been able to do with the Stapleton Townhomes. Quickly, the challenge at the Stapleton Townhomes was to design and develop affordable housing on tight budgets that is undistinguishable from market rate housing while complying with numerous rules and regulations. 2, to design healthy homes that are energy efficient using durable products that are affordable to maintain and operate. And again, designing for families who desire good schools and neighborhood amenities. How are we reducing that funding gap through design and construction innovations? Well, we're doing that through cost-effective site planning, efficient building programming. We're moving fast through entitlements, construction, and design. So just to give you an idea, typically when we go through the building department and zoning reviews, what we do is we worked out with the city of Denver to do those concurrently, and our projects get through planning and zoning building department in 30 to 60 days, when most are taking 3, 4, 5, 6, right, Sue?
7, 8, 9.
Months. That saves us time, that saves us money. That helps us reduce that gap. Also, we're looking at a product that gives you, our buyers, a lot of value for the money. Energy efficient, with a priority on durable and affordable to operate products. And of course, a lot of cost containment and bidding analysis of bids. We look for a team that must have a facility in developing creative, cost-effective design solutions, expertise in working with these low budgets, efficient building programming and floor plan design with no wasted space while maintaining livability, and the ability to quickly and efficiently take the project from concept to reality. So, good affordable housing begins and ends at the site planning phase. So one of the things we did early on was work with the master developer for a city, and they identified the sites, and I'm going to go over 2 of the sites with you. I should mention that they released us to do these all at once, and we phased them. The ability to do that made this cost effective because we could, get our team on board and we could do it very quickly, and the subs had their work, so we could keep the subs and we could keep it moving and we could keep the cost down that way. This is what they would call a liner product. So these are shallow lots, 50 to 65 feet deep. All I want to point out here is that in the site planning, we're able to reduce the sewer and water tap fees by keeping the number of units per building to 4 to 5 units per building. Lower tap size, right, Sue? Lower tap size, lower cost of your site utilities, The liner product I love from the standpoint that it's less landscaping, right? Which means it's easier for the home buyers to operate and maintain. And then also, we're using a unit mix that's 2 and 3 bedrooms. So what I'm doing is I'm interchanging those 2 and 3 bedrooms until I get enough revenue generated that I reduce that gap. That's how we're getting the gap down on every site. So again, same concept here. You see the 4 to 5 buildings. These ones, we had a deeper lot, so 100 to 110 feet deep, and we're orienting the units inward, less landscaping, easy to do site utilities. Again, we're going back and forth with 2 and 3 bedrooms in order to get the gap down. Efficient building programming. So this is a 2-bedroom, it's 950 square feet. All I really want to point out here is that our floor plans emphasize no wasted space and circulation. So they're very open. You see little maneuvers with the powder room, like putting the powder room under the stair, so that we can keep these great open spaces so that it really lives big. Here's a 3-bedroom. This is 1239 square feet. Again, very open, and look what we're doing at the bathroom on the first level. We're robbing some space from the garage so that we can maximize the openness in the living areas. And I should mention the bedrooms as a result, because of this no wasted space and loss of circulation or use for circulation, typically have walk-in closets at 1239 square feet. This is a picture of the living space. So we're putting in large windows in order to allow the unit to be flooded with light, and that's daylighting, so we're saving, it's energy efficient for the buyers. We're also doing hardwood engineered flooring all on the first level. Again, that's more durable, that's easy to maintain, that increases the livability and makes it live big. And then again, it's an open floor plan. This is a shot of the kitchen. I should just mention that that islands are key in what we're doing. They increase counter space and eating space. And then this is a shot of the bedroom. What I want to point out here is that we're doing 9-foot ceilings on the main level, again, so that this lives big. And you can see that from the doorway. It shows you how tall they are. And then we're balancing. So we had to put hardwood in on the first floor, right, to be durable, where you're going to spend most of your time. But I'm balancing the cost with that by putting carpet everywhere else. And in the bedrooms, that's comfortable. So this is the exterior. And I just want to point out here that, it's a 4 to 5 unit building, but we're using one common foundation system, a post-tension slab on grade. So less concrete, one concrete pour, more affordable. We're also using one common asphalt low-pitched roof, which is cheaper to build, but it's also easier to maintain. If we were to have made this a flat roof, it would be harder to maintain and more expensive to maintain, and it would have been more expensive to build. We still have some articulation of the roof by doing some slight hips to make sure that each unit feels individual. The big windows allow for an architectural element, so it's further articulation. And then we're using color. We're using color to distinguish each one of the units, and slight variations in siding, which are all very cost effective. I should note that the paint that we're using is the highest grade paint that you could buy. That's where we do put our money so that it resists fading, and it's going to stay looking good a long time, and it's durable for the home buyers. So I just want to close with the fact that as of May 4th, Denver Post put out an article saying that this summer, the average sales price of a home is going to hit $500,000. And I want to leave you with a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which I love, which says, Real estate cannot be lost or stolen, nor can it be carried away. Purchased with common sense, paid for in full, and managed with reasonable care, it is about the safest investment in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominique. And we're gonna now move on to Susan, who's going to speak to us about how private development can address the needs of affordability through mixed income development and why that's important. Susan.
Okay. Nope, so I'll go back here for a second. Nope. Thank you. And good morning to you all. I wanted to start a little bit with a story about the way I grew up, because we are a product of our upbringing, and for many of us that are in the private sector, what we experienced growing up has affected what we decide to do with our time and the kind of projects that we decide to pursue. I grew up in Philadelphia in a northwest neighborhood called Germantown, and I lived 2 blocks from. Germantown's old. We think we're old here. We're not old. So historic houses here are 50 years old. There were 250 years old. So I lived 2 blocks from homes that were 250 years old, that were mansions with very wealthy people living in them. And 2 blocks down the street from us was a public housing project. And we were kind of in the middle. I went to school with people that were rich and kids that were poor. We played together. Our income had nothing to do with how we played and how we thought of each other. And the idea of having people living together and growing up together with different incomes, I thought was the way everybody lived. Until the suburbs started building and we started seeing how housing and incomes were segregated, and that became some of the issues I think we're dealing with today in many ways. But that has stayed with me. I also had a father who was a deputy director of the community development department for the city, and was very involved in it. So there's a lot of DNA that came to me that even when I started working on the private side, I couldn't forget that part of my upbringing and how important I thought it was for people who are different to be living in environments together. Most of the most interesting projects and communities that I've been involved with have been those that ended up being mixed income. And over the years, that has been very intentional in my work at Urban Ventures. I think that they've created a more interesting mix of people, and we talk about the importance of diversity in nature. It actually is carried over into our communities as well. So I'm supposed to talk about the how, but I had to talk about the why a little bit. And I'm going to run through 3 different projects. 2 were pre-recession and 1 that we're involved with now, just to talk about what it looks like to have a mixed income project. These are all condominium projects, so I can start with that. These are not single family homes or townhomes. And the lessons we learned from these projects and how we made the affordability work is really what I want to talk about today. Monarch Mills is a development, 69 units in downtown in Platte Valley, behind the Museum of Contemporary Art. This was done through a partnership. I wanted to do a mixed income project. The developer who was developing the Museum of Contemporary Art wanted to develop next to this on a site, and East West Properties had a requirement for affordability. They were not having a lot of luck putting it into their more expensive condominium projects in the Platte Valley in Commons Park area. So we ended up saying, well, let us do that. And we ended up with 56 of the 69 units are affordable. This is, as you can see, completion. This was before the recession. This was one where we had we had privately financed, no other city money that came into this, but because of the relationship with the 2 developers that had an interest in being part of this, they ended up, in one case, contributing the land, and the other, and also paying for part of the cost of the underground parking garages. All of the units were that were affordable, or the same size, and had the same physical characteristics of the market rate units. High ceilings, as you talked about, make a huge difference when you have smaller spaces, but these were not that small, as you can see. They started at $150,000 for one bedroom and $220,000 for two bedroom. One of the things we have, and it's not something that I would say it applies everywhere, but we have very few amenities in these projects. If they're located in the right area, there are places for people to work out and clubs all over the place. You don't need to build them there. We only did one parking space per unit, but the quality of the finishes was pretty high level, and if I told you what the construction costs compared to what they are now, you would probably be sick, but I will tell you, $101 a square foot, 8-story concrete building. So part of this was we had a great architect, Young Cho with Studio Completiva, and a great contractor, and that team, that you've heard the importance of that, is really critical, that their values are the same as yours, and that they really want to get a really high-quality project, but that they understand what the budget is, just a vision of it. I live in this building as well, and it is the most interesting place to live in downtown, I believe, because we have firemen there, we have librarians there, we have artists there. We just have it's a very interesting mix of people. 56 of those units have 20-year deed restrictions on them. The second one is Fire Clay Lofts, which was finished, timed that just perfectly for the recession to start. So the last phase of that, the last 53 units opened in 2008. 20% of the units were deed restricted. Again, we had the same finishes. People could upgrade from there, but the same basic finishes were in the affordable units. This was a 2-block project, 2-block site, ended up with 166 units on it that we did in phases. But we have these units that you can see here. The tallest ones are all of the top floor were 2-story units, loft units, and they were all the affordable units. So some of the more beautiful ones, in this case, I think, started at $118,000 a piece. In the back there, you see a brick building, and one of the things we have experienced over the years is that renovation of buildings, if you're patient and you can stand some of the uncertainty, end up being a lot less expensive than doing new construction. So this project was combined with the renovation of this wonderful warehouse building. This is the area that's now known as Rhino, but it wasn't called Rhino back then, and it was just the Upper Larimer neighborhood, and we were surrounded by industrial uses, and it's turned out to be, a great place for housing to have been developed, but it was very much on the edge there. Being on the edge allowed us to buy this property for starting at $11 a square foot, and the highest we paid was $18 a square foot. So that's, and now, of course, I can't afford to do anything in Rhino, so it's very annoying. But it does tell you that if you go on the edge and you're not really, that's not the same kind of housing development that is being done at Stapleton, where you have a lot of amenities, and that's a wonderful model as well. Our model has been to try and go on the edge neighborhoods where the land prices are less. And the last one, which is under construction now, is the ARIA community, co-housing community, which you'll hear more about from Jonathan Rose, who's my partner in this project. Is he in the audience here? There he is. Hi, Jonathan. Hi. This is at 52nd and Federal, and is something that I started working on 11 years ago. That's the other lesson of doing these kinds of projects. Started working on the redevelopment of a former convent, which is called Marycrest, 25 acres. We ended up purchasing 17 and a half acres. This is the convent itself, which is being converted into condos, but in a co-housing community where people own their own units, but then they have a very strong bind between them for community life. They have dinners together, so there's a lot of community space in here. 8 of the units, or 29% of them, are affordable. This again was done with a partnership. And I think one of the lessons for us, and this probably becomes harder and harder as time goes on, is that there are some unusual partners that can come about with these projects. And in this case, and I think I saw one of our partners in the audience, there was a developer that had an IHO requirement in the same way that East West Properties had chosen not to build them in their buildings for a variety of legitimate reasons. We met up, started having conversations, and I said, I'll build them. Instead of giving the money to the city and writing a check to them, we're putting them into this project. There are eight of the units. They're all sold. This will be opening the end of next month. And it's a very interesting mix of people, young families, very intergenerational community here. Community kitchen, and I think we have one of our residents. Adam, are you here? I thought I saw him. I just bumped into somebody who's moving into this, a guy with a, who announced, we found a time capsule in this building when we were renovating it, which was kind of cool, that the Sisters of St. Francis had put in and hidden in 1958. So we took it out and we, shared all the stuff with the sisters who were still involved on the site, and then we put it back in. And Adam was one of the people that came to the little ceremony that day, and he got up and announced that they're pregnant. So he happened to have a picture of, he had the ultrasound that they just had done. So he wrote the name of the kid on it and put it in the time capsule. So next 50 years, that child will know what's going on. This one has a lot of amenities in it, which is because of the co-housing nature of it. And again, high quality. We didn't differentiate between the market units versus the affordable units in it. And it will be a very interesting community. I could not have made the economics of this work, including affordable units, or in any of these projects, without a partnership or some assistance. In the case of Fireclay, the city made a loan for environmental cleanup that we had on the site, and it became a grant. It was forgiven at the end of it when we created the last of the 32 affordable units in it. In both the co-housing and in Monarch Mills, we had other private developer partners that allowed us to move ahead with this. But it has really enriched the project, and this is just to give you a sense of what it'll be like. This is the community room where people can have dinners together, however often they want. This is the view of a typical unit. Again, we have manufactured hardwood floors there as well, and higher ceilings, and that's that. So what have we learned along the way here? One is that you have to beg, borrow, and hopefully not steal to get the resources that you need to make these deals work, because unlike Hope Communities or Northeast Denver or other nonprofits or Habitat, that we are a profit-making entity. That's the theory, and we have our own levels of expectation, but we also have a social conscience that says we have to figure out ways to make this work so we can create affordable housing and also have our investors and ourselves make a market rate return, which we have on all of these projects. They are much more difficult, and so when someone says, why would you go through the brain damage of this, I look at it and say this is kind of a niche for developers. I think that the redeveloping convents for those women, you women here, redeveloping convents is a niche for women developers because the sisters like to deal with women. So that's just a side note there. But in terms of these projects, especially if they're adaptive reuse or whatever they are, and figuring out the financing, they are much more difficult. FHA right this minute, I don't know if anybody is in this room that's representing them, but FHA will not allow us, we've always done FHA projects, they will not allow us to submit an application for this building to be an FHA-approved project until we get our CO. So how does that affect the people who are supposed to move in if we can't start that? So there are all kinds of complications with these, but they all are, if you want to be in this business and you like the creativity and the challenges out there, then trying to do this as a model on a private side is interesting. And then finally, I think that I mentioned the importance of the locations. It's very difficult to find land that isn't $100 a square foot in Denver anymore. I mean, it's just, when anybody says, what's it cost? $100. And that is, so you have to look off, you have to get off the grid. You got to look further and further away, still in the city, but in unlikely places. And it's hard to find those unlikely places anymore, but I think that's key to it, and there's always a need. This ARIA project, and you'll hear more from Jonathan because he's talking about it holistically, is an interesting project and location because it really is on the edge of the city. It's as far northwest as you can be in the city. This was annexed into the city, so it's really much further north than anywhere else, but it is in the city of Denver, which is a much better place, as far as I'm concerned, to be doing development than some of the other suburbs around here. I don't know how you do this in 30 to 60 days, but I have actually found that our issues with with getting developments done are not really the entitlement and the city processes. It's all our wonderful Excel folks and the other utilities that are outside the control of city. And I hope I'm not offending people from Excel, but the reality is that's what's causing the delays. And one other thing, we were talking about experience in other cities, and one of the things that I would like us to talk about here are what is it that we could do in this community that would actually help and reduce the costs for all of us that are developing affordable housing. And we should look at the Portland model when we have a chance to talk about that, because they have made a much more conscious decision about reducing tap fees and property tax waivers and all kinds of things that we're not doing in the city. And if we are serious about this, we're going to have to start looking in those areas. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Susan. So we've all heard a number of interesting projects, I think very innovative approaches to making housing more affordable. But I wanted, before I open up for questions from the audience, just one more question for this panel, and that is to go ahead and share any innovative approaches that you've discovered along the way to making housing affordable that would really help us here in Denver. Like anything associated with barriers, associated with permitting or fees or any other type of regulatory infrastructure that is not necessarily already aligned with the mission of affordability and affordable housing in Denver. And that's one of the challenges that I know every one of them have probably faced somewhere along the way, is that misalignment of the mission with all of the regulatory infrastructure, for example, the hoops we jump through. So anything you want to share from something you've discovered along the way in other cities or other communities?
Well, I can start with maybe follow up on the Portland situation. They have something, all their utilities and their costs their charged are called system development fees. And they have a sliding scale in their city that if you build X percent affordable within your project, they will waive those fees. And the fees are significant. I mean, they are, because they control water. I mean, Denver Water is a separate entity. So the number that we were there about a week ago, and we went through a private development that had I think 20% of the units as affordable. And that developer walked through the math on it. They had their property taxes were waived, all of the fees were waived, and they said that filled the gap between them making that unit affordable versus a market rate unit. So it's hard here, and it was been tried for years and years and years, and we all keep saying it. But if we're really serious about this, then everybody that is charging fees needs to be in a room and say, this is your problem as well as ours if we can't make this economy continue to be healthy because we can't get this development in. So you have to take a step back and look at what your impact is on the cost of housing.
The approach, just to reiterate, the approach that we like to take is working within the rules to try to see how, like, the quickest possible way that we could make it work. So I'll just reiterate, working with the city of Denver to do the concurrent review of the zoning and the building department at the same time was huge. And then also, when we're looking at the number of units per building, you know, just because you brought up Excel, it not only saves on water tap fees to keep it to 4 to 5 units per building, but also on Excel, because they'll pay for the distribution if it's under 7 units. So, you know, it's really knowing the rules and then working within them to try to do it the quickest way possible.
I don't think I have anything to add on the kind of regulatory or process side. I just want to reiterate the point that I think we always have to be thinking about with affordable home ownership, and that is we have to build an affordable product and we have to provide an affordable loan. And so I think that's where the innovation needs to come, that it's not these separate industries that just looks at this within silos, that we really have to think about this in conjunction with one another, because it can't just be that, you know, the developers, you know, kind of take all those costs, but then we don't have it on the financing side or vice versa.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? We've got a few minutes left. Yes, sir.
Yes. Paul Simpson, we know each other. I think people can hear me all right. The $100 average square foot across the property of Denver, is there, what is above, what kind of properties are above that level, at that level, and below that level, and where in Denver?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I'm the one to answer that. And what's that? Okay, the question was, I mean, I had thrown out a number that said every time you turn around, whatever part of the city you're in, the cost of the land is $100 a square foot. And I threw that out. I mean, there are plenty of places probably that are not that high. Rhino is over that at this point. And many neighborhoods where you would see development, I'm sure Cherry Creek is in that range, if not higher. And you know, it's the areas that are not developed yet, they're not redeveloped yet. I mean, we really are, and it's a good thing, I suppose, that we're running out of neighborhoods that areas that have not been developed, but the pressures on many of those neighborhoods is increasing costs. I don't know if anybody's here that's so anybody here that's involved with Globeville, Elyria, Swansea that knows about Anna. So you can respond to that in that neighborhood.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm sure Heather knows too. But I'd say. Heather, you can truth test me on this, but I think $40 to $50 is what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and from our perspective, that's shocking, and it's moving quickly.
Well, and I think the thing that goes along with that, you asked about what's below that $100. You know, I think what you get into is a lot more complexity in what you have in the dirt, in the land that you're buying. And so the cost for the land might be cheaper, but accessibility to infrastructure, you know, what is in that dirt, how you design those piece of properties, that's, you know, that then adds up the cost in kind of another category, but it still impacts the overall affordability. So I think the overarching headline is just there's not a lot of great opportunities to really figure out a way to come in without additional resources to be able to build affordably.
Yeah, and if I can pile on a little bit, we're also talking about a lot of contamination.
Exactly.
So not only infrastructure, lack of grid, contamination, et cetera.
To follow up on that concept, has anybody ever really thought about the possibility of taking a holistic view to home development where we basically get the 800-pound gorilla out of the room, and that seems to be utilities and these tap fees that get delivered to these properties? And I just heard this mention about, gee, it would be great if we could get property at lower square footage costs, but you know what? They're going to be outside of the municipal grid, going to be issues with waste lines and so forth. Why haven't we actually piloted a concept where we could take a property and put a utility demarcation point on it, and then let the builder developer decide, gee, I don't want all 4 utilities, I might just want gas and water. Let me generate my own electricity and heat, and let me take care of my local waste. Now, this is a pretty disruptive model, but I think it's worth pursuing because we could do some very innovative things in some not only infill properties, but also in the suburban tiers and maybe some rural opportunities. For the question for anybody on the panel, has anybody approached a very innovative way of doing housing where you take control of the tap fees and the distributed energy generation on that property?
Well, I can tell you about one that is in the works there, and I don't know if there's anybody here from the Denver Housing Authority, or on the board of that, but if you watch the evolution of Sun Valley redevelopment, Sun Valley is in something that's called an eco-district, and with exactly that kind of perspective that will guide its development to try and figure out how to most efficiently control the costs of its own utilities over the years. And I think that's probably the one that is the best model for Denver to look at.
Does the eco-district allow you to get these fee waivers and take on that role of responsibility for the district?
So the question is, does the eco-district allow them to take on, to get the waivers of fees? I mean, their model, and this is not a project I'm involved with, so I'm doing this from my understanding of it. Renee, do you know enough about this to talk about this? Good, but I mean, that they are really trying to build a model where they do control their own distribution of energy. And I don't know about city fees or any of those kinds of things, but in terms of the energy part of it, I think they are.
They are definitely working towards self-sustaining in terms of those district expenses. And
Thank you.
Okay, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I want to give a big thank you to our panelists. And a big thank you to all of you for attending, and I think we have one final announcement from Andrea.
Hi, thank you all for your energetic participation. I'm sorry that we didn't have quite as much time to ask questions as we would have liked, but come back after the break because we'll have more specific solutions to the issues we've been discussing, and we'll get started promptly at 11:45. Thank you.